It's kind of wild to think about how quickly things change.
Mm-hmm.
Not that long ago, marijuana was something, talked about in whispers.
Right.
And now here we are, April 2025, and over half the U.S. states have legalized it in some form.
It's become so mainstream.
Totally. And the numbers are just staggering. Experts are predicting the global market will hit over, what, $73 billion by 2027?
That's the projection. It's a remarkable and rapid transformation, really. A huge societal shift in attitudes and usage.
Absolutely. But, with all this growth, something's been nagging at us.
Yeah.
And that's what we really wanted to dig into today.
Okay.
You might assume, right, that with legalization comes safety and quality.
That's the logical assumption, yeah.
But what if that's not always the case? I mean, we've been looking into the often unseen side of this whole industry, and some of what we found is pretty surprising.
A little unsettling, perhaps.
Yeah, honestly, a little unsettling. It raises a critical question, doesn't it? As consumers embrace legal marijuana, are we fully aware of the potential risks and, like, the standards or maybe the lack of standards behind these products?
Exactly. Are we getting what we think we're getting?
Precisely. We actually took it a step further. We conducted our own investigation, testing a range of popular marijuana strains.
Oh, interesting.
And look, our core takeaway today is pretty straightforward. Until there's a much more robust, consistent system to ensure the safety of these products, exercising caution, maybe even like minimal or no use, that might just be the wisest path for your well-being right now.
It makes sense. I mean, if you consider how fast this industry blew up, it's maybe not entirely unexpected that regulations are still playing catch up.
Right.
And the drive for profitability, in any new market, that can sometimes lead to compromises. Quality, safety, if strong oversight isn't really there.
It really is a double-edged sword. Think about it. A recent poll showed over half of Americans have tried marijuana now, up significantly from just a few years ago.
Huge increase.
And on one hand, you hear amazing stories, right? Like how CBD, part of the cannabis plant, can seriously help reduce seizures for some epilepsy patients. There's real medicinal value being explored.
Definitely. That therapeutic promise is a big part of this, supported by ongoing research for specific conditions.
And culturally, it's just everywhere. You see dispensaries popping up all over, like coffee shops in cities like Denver or L.A.
That cultural integration reflects a much broader normalization. Absolutely.
But then you have to look at the regulatory side. And that's where it gets complicated.
Yeah.
Unlike the super strict rules for pharmaceuticals or even our food.
Right. Much clearer standards there.
The marijuana industry operates in this, like, fragmented way. Because it's still illegal federally in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
So there isn't one set of rules everyone follows.
That conflict between state and federal law is a fundamental challenge. No unified federal framework means every state is kind of doing its own thing.
Exactly. And it leads to this, well, patchwork quilt of regulations. A recent report really hammered this home. Only about 60% of legal states require mandatory pesticide testing. Even fewer check for heavy metals.
Which is concerning. It makes it really hard to establish and enforce comprehensive safety standards nationwide.
And this patchwork, it can create loopholes, right? Opportunities for growers or manufacturers maybe looking to cut corners, prioritize profit over safety, using potentially harmful chemicals.
It's a risk in any underregulated industry.
So you can walk into a really nice-looking dispensary, all sleek and professional, and just assume everything on the shelf is safe. Totally the natural assumption. But our investigation, well, it made us seriously question that assumption.
That legitimate appearance, the legal status, it can definitely foster a sense of security, even if the underlying standards aren't uniformly rigorous.
So to really get a handle on what's going on, we decided to do our own testing.
Okay, so what did you test?
We picked 5 really popular strains. You've probably heard of them. Blue Dream, OG Kush, Sour Diesel, Girl Scout Cookies, and Gorilla Glue.
Common ones, yeah.
We got samples from dispensaries in California, Colorado, and Oregon, mature markets,
Cross-section.
and we sent them to a well-regarded third-party lab, Analytical 360. They're known for being thorough, checking potency, pesticides, heavy metals, even microbial stuff like mold and bacteria.
Using a reputable independent lab is key for reliable results. So what did you find?
Okay, let's dive in strain by strain. And honestly, the results were pretty shocking.
Uh-oh.
First, Blue Dream from California. This one came back with traces of myclobutanol.
Myclobutanol, that's a pesticide,
Oh,
right?
yeah. And it's actually banned for cannabis in several places because it's pretty toxic when you heat it. It can break down into hydrogen cyanide gas when burned.
Hydrogen cyanide. Wow, okay, that's seriously concerning, especially for smoking or vaping.
Right. And on top of that, we found zero point 0.3 parts per million of lead. Yeah. California's own safety limit is 0.2 ppm, so it's actually over their legal threshold.
Not good. Lead is cumulative too. Even small amounts add up over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, OG Kush from Colorado. Good news. It passed the pesticide tests,
Okay, some good news.
but it showed 1.2 ppm of arsenic.
Arsenic. Wow. Another heavy metal.
Yeah, linked to cancer, neurological issues, the most likely source, probably contaminated water used during growing.
That highlights a big vulnerability in cultivation, doesn't it? If your water source is bad, the plants just suck that stuff up.
Seems like it. Then we have sour diesel from Oregon. This one had a couple of issues. First, high levels of mold, specifically aspergillus.
Aspergillus mold. That can cause pretty nasty lung infections, especially for people with weaker immune systems, right?
Exactly, aspergillosis. And to make things worse, the potency was way off.
How far off?
Advertised at 25% THC, tested at only 18%.
Okay, so not only potentially harmful mold, but you're also not getting what you paid for in terms of potency. That points to quality control issues, maybe post-harvest handling problems too.
Yeah, drying, storage, something went wrong there. Then Girl Scout cookies from California. Not much better, unfortunately.
What did you find there?
Residues of imidacloprid, another pesticide, harmful in larger doses, and it also failed the microbial test. E. coli contamination.
E. coli. That usually points to poor hygiene somewhere in the handling or processing, doesn't
And
it?
that's what it suggests. And the imidacloprid, even if it's below acutely toxic levels, you worry about chronic exposure.
Absolutely. Long-term effects are often unknown or understudied.
Okay, finally, Gorilla Glue from Colorado. This one was actually the cleanest of the bunch we tested.
Relatively speaking.
Relatively, yeah. But it still had trace amounts of lead, 0.1 ppm, so under the limit, but still there. And another issue with potency labeling. Advertised as 22% THC, tested at 19%.
So even the best one still had issues with heavy metals and accurate labeling. That really underlines the inconsistency, doesn't it? Even in established legal markets.
It really does. So what's the big takeaway here for listeners? Even if you're buying legal weed in states with mature markets,
States people assume have it figured out.
right, you could be getting products with harmful stuff in them. Pesticides, heavy metals, mold, bacteria. It's not just about maybe getting weaker pot. It's about real risks to your health.
These findings together paint a pretty worrying picture. The presence of these different contaminants across different strains and states suggests systemic issues, things that need urgent attention to protect public health.
And it really feels like, we could be looking at a significant public health issue down the line if this isn't addressed.
Definitely. Let's maybe unpack why these contaminants are so dangerous. Understanding the specific risks is crucial.
Good idea. Let's start with pesticides. They're common in agriculture, sure, but with cannabis.
The delivery method is different.
Exactly. Unlike fruit you wash, you're often inhaling this stuff directly into your lungs or ingesting it in edibles.
Which bypasses some of the body's natural filters and defenses.
Yeah.
Amplifies the risk.
Yeah. A 2019 study found pesticide residues in like 60% of California cannabis samples they tested. We're talking things like myclobutanol, the one we found.
The one that makes hydrogen cyanide.
Right. But also others linked to respiratory problems, maybe even cancer. It's serious stuff.
The prevalence found in that study is definitely a red flag.
Then you have heavy metals, like we saw with the lead and arsenic in our tests. Cannabis plants are kind of like sponges.
Bioaccumulators.
Yeah, they can suck up heavy metals from contaminated soil or water. Other studies back this up, finding detectable levels in a lot of samples.
And lead, even at low levels, is bad news. Neurological damage, kidney issues, developmental problems, especially for kids.
And arsenic is a known carcinogen. Remember that really awful case in Oregon?
The one with the extremely high lead levels.
Yeah, a batch of lemon haze tested at 12 times the legal limit for lead.
12 times. Where did it come from?
They traced it back to soil near an old industrial site, just polluted ground.
Wow. That's a stark example of how environmental contamination can directly end up in the product and harm consumers.
Totally. And we can't forget the microbial stuff, mold, bacteria, yeast.
Which can thrive if cannabis isn't dried, cured, or stored properly.
Exactly. The aspergillus we found in the sour diesel, that can cause aspergillosis, those lung infections. There have even been reported cases linking infections back to contaminated cannabis.
Especially dangerous for immunocompromised people.
And the E. coli, like in the Girl Scout cookies, that means potential gastrointestinal illness. It just screams poor sanitation somewhere along the line.
It really highlights the need for strict hygiene and quality control from farm to package.
And one more thing, additives and fillers, especially in vape products.
Ah, yes, the vape issue.
Some companies add stuff to stretch the product, boost profits. An investigation a few years back found cutting agents like propylene glycol, PG, and polyethylene glycol, PEG, in like 30% of vape carts they checked in California.
And the problem is, when you heat those substances,
They can break down into formaldehyde, a known carcinogen.
not something you want to inhale. Plus, in edibles, you might get artificial flavors, preservatives, maybe not clearly listed. Bad news for allergies or sensitivities.
Yeah, the lack of transparency is a real problem there too, it all seems like.
Yeah,
Where does the system break down? Let's maybe walk through the production process.
good idea. Looking at cultivation, processing, and testing can show us the potential failure points.
Okay, cultivation, growing the plant. Growers often use chemical pesticides, fertilizers,
Yeah.
trying to get the biggest yield, right?
Standard agricultural practice in many ways.
But in less regulated places, maybe they use banned stuff, really toxic chemicals, and even approved pesticides, if used improperly, can leave residues.
Plus the bioaccumulation issue we mentioned, soaking up whatever's in the soil and water, like that lead example.
Right, which is why organic methods, though maybe more expensive, are generally seen as safer. But it's worrying that even in legal states, reports show growers failing pesticide tests and sometimes facing minimal penalties.
Yeah, enforcement needs teeth. The growing practices are just fundamental to safety.
Okay, then comes processing. Making concentrates, edibles, vape oil.
Extraction time.
They often use solvents like butane or ethanol to pull out the cannabinoids. But if they don't get all that solvent out...
Residual solvents, another potential contaminant.
Exactly. Studies have found concerning levels in some concentrates in certain markets, and this is also where they might add things back in synthetic terpenes for flavor, artificial sweeteners in edibles, often without clear labeling.
And because there aren't always standardized protocols, the quality and purity can just vary wildly from batch to batch, producer to producer.
Which leads us to the final stage.
Mhm.
Testing. This should be the safety net, right?
Yeah.
The final check.
It should be, but it often falls short.
How so?
Well, some labs might just lack the right equipment or maybe the expertise to accurately detect really low levels of some contaminants.
Okay.
Audits have actually found labs failing accuracy standards. Some were even caught inflating THC potency numbers, which might explain those discrepancies you found.
That makes sense.
Wow.
Trying to make the product seem stronger than it is.
Possibly. Plus, labs don't always test for everything. Maybe they check pesticides and potency, but not heavy metals or residual solvents routinely. It depends on the state regulations, which vary.
And we hear whispers, even reports about, let's say, less scrupulous practices. Dispensaries paying labs to fudge results, maybe.
Unfortunately, that has been reported. Pressure to pass products can compromise integrity, so the reliability and thoroughness of testing are absolutely critical, but they aren't always guaranteed.
So, bringing it all together, what are the actual health implications here? Why are we suggesting caution, maybe minimal use? Let's talk short-term versus long-term.
Okay. Understanding the potential health outcomes really drives home the importance of this.
Short-term first. You could get, what, respiratory irritation?
Yeah.
Headaches, dizziness from pesticide exposure?
Yeah, there are case studies of things like acute bronchitis linked to specific pesticide residues on cannabis.
And microbial stuff. Mold, bacteria. That can mean infections, maybe stomach issues if it's in edibles.
Right, gastrointestinal problems. There was an outbreak linked to salmonella in edibles in Michigan a few years back.
Wow. And those vape additives, throat irritation, coughing, maybe even linked to serious lung conditions like popcorn lung.
That link has been investigated, particularly concerning certain flavoring agents, sometimes used in vapes, though often associated more with nicotine vapes initially. The point is, inhaled additives can cause immediate respiratory issues.
Okay, so those are the immediate risks. What about the long haul?
That's where it gets even more concerning, potentially. Chronic exposure. Think about heavy metals like lead. Over time, accumulation can contribute to cognitive decline, kidney damage, increased risk of heart disease.
And arsenic.
Linked to various cancers, lung, skin, bladder.
What about long-term pesticide exposure?
Some studies suggest links to neurological disorders, potentially an increased risk for things like Parkinson's disease with certain types of pesticides.
And the carcinogens, like Formaldehyde from vape additives or maybe pesticide breakdown.
Increased cancer risk is the worry there. Some studies have tried to estimate the increased lung cancer risk for regular users exposed to these, though it's complex to isolate the exact cause. But the potential is there.
And here's something really unsettling. The effects of marijuana itself, feeling relaxed or euphoric, could that actually mask some of the early symptoms of being exposed to these contaminants?
That's a very real possibility. Someone might dismiss a headache or slight nausea as just part of the marijuana effect, when it could actually be an early sign of lead exposure, for example.
So you might not realize there's a problem until it's more serious.
Exactly. It can delay diagnosis and treatment. It's quite insidious.
Let's quickly circle back to that Oregon case. The lemon haze, with 12 times the lead limit, sold in a regular Portland dispensary, traced to bad soil.
A real-world nightmare scenario.
The health consequences were devastating,
Yes.
right? Neurological damage, kidney issues, hundreds reporting headaches, nausea, fatigue. And that poor woman hospitalized with lead poisoning seizures, memory loss.
Just awful. And what was the penalty again?
A fine of like $10,000 for the grower, which seems inadequate given the harm.
Woefully inadequate. It highlights the potential for severe harm and the failure of oversight in that instance.
And it really underscores our point. Minimal or no use could have prevented all that suffering. The lack of transparency just makes it so hard for consumers. You see vague words like natural or organic on labels.
But often with no real certification or proof behind them.
Right. Surveys show tons of legal products had misleading labels.
It erodes trust and makes informed choices almost impossible.
People talk about third-party testing as the solution. Look for the COA, the Certificate of Analysis.
And that can help, definitely. It provides some data.
But as we discussed, it has limitations, right? Not all labs are trustworthy. They might not test for everything. There's pressure to pass products.
Exactly. So while looking for a COA from a reputable lab is good advice, it's not a foolproof guarantee of safety. The risks, sadly, can still remain.
Which brings us back, again, to being cautious.
To summarize the why behind that caution, unpredictable contamination, even in legal markets.
Serious short and long-term health risks we just talked about.
Lack of consistent, rigorous industry regulation and oversight.
And the potential for marijuana's own effects to mask symptoms of contamination.
Taken together, it presents a compelling argument for minimizing exposure right now.
Now look, if someone does choose to use marijuana despite all this, are there ways to be maybe a little safer? Harm reduction.
There are strategies, yes. Choosing brands known for transparency and rigorous testing. Carefully vetting COAs if available.
Maybe choosing edibles over smoking or vaping to avoid inhaling contaminants.
That could potentially reduce inhalation risks from pesticides or microbial issues, though edibles carry risks of inaccurate dosing or other contaminants like E. coli if sanitation is poor. There's no zero-risk option besides abstinence.
Right, so harm reduction helps, but it doesn't eliminate the problem. Minimizing or avoiding use is still the most effective way to protect yourself from these specific risks we're discussing.
Absolutely. It remains the clearest path to avoiding potential harm from contamination in the current environment.
So what needs to change? How do we fix this? What's the path forward to make this industry safer?
It's going to take a multi-pronged effort. Regulation, industry action, consumer awareness.
Top of the list, probably.
Yeah.
Unified federal regulations.
Yeah.
Like we have for food, for drugs. Get everyone on the same page.
Consistent safety standards nationwide. That's crucial. Mandatory testing for all key contaminants, pesticides, heavy metals, microbes, residual solvents.
And make those results, the COAs, easily accessible to the public.
Yeah.
Real transparency.
Much stricter enforcement, too. Significant penalties for companies that violate safety rules, not just a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, like that $10 K fine. Needs more bite. What else?
Public health campaigns. We need to educate consumers about these potential risks so they can make informed choices and demand better.
And maybe support or incentivize safer growing, like organic methods.
That would be a positive step, encouraging practices that inherently reduce chemical inputs and contamination risks.
But until those kinds of big changes happen, the responsibility really falls back on the individual consumer, doesn't it?
Largely, yes. Which means exercising significant caution, perhaps choosing minimal or no use, is currently the most reliable form of self-protection.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly recap the main points. We've uncovered significant, often hidden risks with contaminated marijuana.
Pesticides, heavy metals, microbes. Our testing and other research confirm this is a real issue, not just theoretical.
We've talked about the potential for serious health problems, both immediate and long-term. And those real-world examples, like the Oregon lead poisoning case, they're deeply concerning.
They highlight the human cost when safety systems fail. The current market still carries considerable, often underestimated risks due to inconsistent standards and enforcement.
And that leads us back to our central message today. As a consumer, you absolutely deserve products that are safe and accurately labeled. That should be the baseline.
It really should.
But until the industry, as a whole, consistently meets that standard, the safest choice really is to minimize or completely avoid marijuana use.
Making that choice empowers you to protect your health, and frankly, it sends a message to the industry, too, that safety and quality have to come before profits.
That's a powerful thought. Maybe just something to leave folks with. Or think about what other everyday products, things we assume are safe, might have similar hidden risks because of inconsistent rules or oversight.
Or perhaps consider how you might talk about this with friends or family who use marijuana, sharing this information so they can also make informed decisions about their own well-being.
Yeah. Ultimately, the most important thing is just to take this information in, think about it, and prioritize your own health.